Hi there, Mr. Holcomb here with another episode of The Math Behind the Modules. Okay, this is lesson 12, completing the square. It is revisiting completing the square. There's one slight change. In lesson 11, the a in ax squared plus bx plus c, a was equal to 1 in lesson 11. Here in lesson 12, we're using ax squared plus bx plus c, but a is not going to equal 1. It can be equal 2, 3, 4, what else? Okay, so opening exercise is just a review of lesson 11. It is 2 problems that they want you to complete the square where a is 1. So pause the video, see if you can do this, and then come back and see how you did. So we have z squared minus 5z plus 8. And just like in the last lesson, we take our z squared minus z, which is our terms with the variable, and put them in parentheses and leave a space, and put our constant outside. That's step 1. Then, it would help if I had a 5 here, minus 5z. And then we're going to take that b, and let me move it over a little further. I'm going to take negative 5, which is my b, and divide it by 2, and then square it. So this is my b divided by 2 squared. So negative 5 over 2 squared is, remember, a negative squared is always positive, and 2 squared is 4. So that's going to be plus 25 over 4. And I wanted to do that in a different color because I'm showing you what's going to happen here. So it's plus 25 over 4. And since I added 25 over 4, my 4 looked funky there. Since I added 25 over 4, I have to subtract 25 over 4 to keep this term equal to the original. If I add 25 quarters, I have to also subtract 25 quarters to make that 0 and no change. So now that I've done that, I now have a perfect square where it's the first term and it's my b divided by 2 goes in here. So it's minus 5 halves quantity squared. And then 8 I will erase and change colors, and because I need a fraction with a denominator of 4, and 8 times 4 is 32, so 32 divided by 4 is equivalent to that 8 that was there. So 32 minus 25 is 7 over 4. So this is the answer, z minus 5 halves squared plus 7 quarters. Okay? Next done. Parentheses, put the x terms together in the parentheses and leave a space and put the constant outside. Off to the side, take your b and divide it by 2, and that equals 0.3, and square that, and 0.3 is 0.09. So half squared goes here. I'll do it in a different color. And since I added 0.09, I need to subtract 0.09. So after doing that, I get a perfect square of x, and I take my b, which was plus 0.3 quantity squared, and then I just need to calculate 1 minus 0.09, and that is 0.91. So my answer is x plus 0.3 squared plus 0.91. Okay, so now on to example 1. Now this is in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c, where a does not equal 1. A is 2. All right, so here we go. What we're going to do here is we're going to do our parentheses, and we're going to put x squared there. I'm going to take my 2 and I'm going to put it outside here. Okay, I'm factoring out the 2, so I have a leading coefficient of 1 in my parentheses. So this is going to be 2x squared and then it's going to be plus, and since I factored out a 2 from the x's, I'm going to take 16x divided by 2 and get 8x. Okay, but I don't divide the constant by 2. That's not part of our perfect square. So it's still going to be plus 3 outside. So I have 2 times x squared plus 8x, because if I distribute this, I get 2x squared plus 16x and then plus 3. So now that I've done that, I now have my b is 8. And I take my b and I divide it by 2, and that equals 4. And I'm going to show this a different way this time. 4 squared is 16, but I'm not going to put 16 here. I'm going to put plus 4 squared. Let me change this 8x to black because I'm doing this for a reason. Plus 8x. And I'm going to put 4 plus 4 squared in here. I'm using this here instead of the 16 because 4 squared is 16. I could put 16 here, but I'm just showing you something here. So since I added 2 times 4 squared, as you can see, if I distribute this, that's really 16 times 2. So I have to subtract, not add, subtract. See, this is 2 times a positive 4 squared. So I'm adding 4 squared times 2, so I need to subtract 2 times 4 squared outside here. Hopefully you'd understand that by my color coding. I'm adding a multiple of 2 4 squared, so I need to subtract a multiple of 2 4 squareds to get back to my original. Okay? So now that I've done that, I have my 2, then I put my parentheses here, and it's an x, close the parentheses, and how do I get this here is going to be 4. Because if this was, let me just show you this one time. Instead of writing a squared here, this is what squaring something is, something times itself. If I FOIL this or do the distributive property, x times x is x squared, x times 4 is 4x, 4 times x is 4x, 4x plus 4x is 8x, and 4 times 4 is 4 squared, or 16. Okay? So we don't write the perfect squares like that, but I was just showing you that's why this 4 squared, I can move that 2 out here. So this equals this. And then it's going to be plus 3 minus, so it's going to be plus 3 minus 4 squared is 16 times 2 is 32. So that is going to give us a final answer of 2x plus 4 squared minus 29. And this is our perfect square of this quadratic where a was not 2, or not 1, and where a was 2. Okay, on to page 2. Example 2, business application vocabulary. So let's just go over some vocabulary first in case you aren't familiar with some of these vocabulary words. Unit price, or price per unit, is the price per item a business sets to sell its product, which is sometimes represented as a linear expression. Okay, unit price. So how much does one item cost? Quantity, the number of items sold, sometimes represented as a linear expression. Revenue means the total income based on sales, but without considering the cost of doing business. Okay, so that's not taking into account expenses, just how much they made selling a product. Revenue, income based on sales. Unit cost is cost per unit or production cost. The cost of producing one item, sometimes represented as a linear expression. So the cost to make one, remember in math, unit means 1. Unit circle, a circle with a radius of 1. Profit, the amount of money a business makes on the sale of its product. Profit is determined by taking the total revenue, the quantities sold multiplied by the price per unit, and subtracting the total cost to produce the items. The quantity sold multiplied by the production cost per unit therefore gives us an equation profit equals total revenue minus total production costs. The following business formulas are used in this and the remaining lessons in the module. Total production costs equals cost per unit times the quantity of items sold. So how much one unit costs times how many units you have. Total revenue is the price per unit times the quantity of items sold. And then the profit's the total revenue minus the total profits costs. Or total production costs, I mean. All right, now solving the following problems. A certain business is marketing its product and has collected data on sales and prices for the past few years. The company determined that when it raised the selling price of the product, the number of sales went down. People weren't willing to pay more for the product. The cost of producing a single item is $10. So the cost of producing a single item is your unit. The cost of producing a single item, production cost, unit cost, is $10. Using the data the company collected in this table, determine a linear expression to represent the quantity sold. So as you can see, S is going up by 5. Quantity sold is going down by 100. And it's linear. So this is increasing by 5, this is decreasing by 100. Increase by 5, decrease by 100, increase by 5, decrease by 100. So what we want to do is pick any two points, if you will, of data and find the slope. So I'm going to use the 20 and the 10 just because it'll be easier. Now keep in mind this is x and this is y. And slope equals y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. So in this case, our y2 is 800 minus y1, which is 1,000, divided by x2, which is 20, minus x1, which is 10. So 800 minus 1,000 is 200 negative, divided by 20 minus 10, which is 10. Reduce this, and we get negative 20. Okay, so remember an equation is y equals mx plus b. All right, well in this case we don't have x's and y's. I put x and y here just to make it easier. My y is now a q, so I'm going to put a q here. Equals, my slope was negative 20. I'm not going to use x, I'm going to use s. So negative 20s plus b. Okay, so that's a q, by the way. Q equals negative 20s plus b. We're not done yet. We have to find our y-intercept. Well, how do we do that? Well, we pick any one of these points that we have a q and an s, plug it in, and find b. So if I just use this one for ease, my q is 1,000 equals negative 20 times s, which is 10, plus b. Okay, and when I do this calculation, I'm going to get 1,000 equals negative 20 times 10 is negative 200 plus b. And to get b, I'm going to add 200 to both sides. And when I'm finished, I get 1,000 plus 200 is 1,200 equals, these cancel, and I get my b. So now I take this equation over here and finish it, and it is q equals negative 20s plus the b we just found, which is 1,200. So there is the equation. Whoops. Try that again. This is the equation for this set of data. Okay, on to page 3. B says, now find an expression to represent the profit function. Now, if we go back to the last page, it's right here. So let me copy this over. Okay, so I brought this equation in from the previous page, and it says profit equals total revenue minus total production cost. So I'm going to use P for profit. But what am I going to do about total revenue? So I'm going to go back. And now when I come down to total revenue, it's the price per unit times the quantity of items sold. And that is our table right here. So price per unit is selling price, or S, and quantity sold is Q. So if this is S and this is Q, then total revenue is S times Q. So when I come back here, total revenue is S times Q. Minus, and then total production costs. And total production costs is right here, cost per unit times the quantity of items sold. But it says right here in this last sentence, the cost of producing a single item is $10. So the production cost is $10 times the quantity sold. Okay, and so that is minus the production cost times that same quantity sold that we have over here. So there's our equation. Hopefully you understood that. Profit, total revenue, which is S in Q times Q, minus the cost of producing one, $10, times the quantity Q. Okay, so this is like a puzzle, so just be patient with me. Hopefully you understand what happened here. And now I need to substitute some things in. So, profit, P, equals total revenue, which is S times Q. And what does S and Q represent? I just need to make sure this is clear. Selling price times the quantity sold, minus production cost times the quantity of items. Okay. Now when I write P here, that means total profit. If I write P parentheses S, I don't mean profit times S. I mean the total profit with respect to the selling price. Total profit with respect to the selling price. That's all that means. Equals. Now what I'm going to do is, I have an S here. That's going to stay. I have a Q here. But remember, in the first example, we found this formula for Q. Q equals negative 20S plus 1,200. So everywhere I see that, I'm going to substitute it into my equation. Q equals negative 20S plus 1,200. Here's a Q. Instead of Q, I'm going to put negative 20S plus 1,200. Okay, this is my Q that I found in this problem here. Q equals this, so now I'm doing substitution. Q equals this, minus 10 times Q again. Instead of putting Q, I'm going to put negative 20S plus 1,200. Okay, so I have the profit with respect to sales equals S times my equation minus 10 times that same equation of Q. And now I'm going to distribute this. So P of S equals S times negative 20S is negative 20S squared plus 1,200S minus, and now I distribute the 10. Negative times a negative is positive. 10 times 20 is 200 S. Negative times a positive is negative. 10 times 1,200 is 120,000. Okay, we're getting closer. Now I combine my like terms, which is my middle. So I get P of S equals negative 20 S, and 1,200 plus 200 is 1,400 S minus 120,000. And this is the expression that represents the profits function. Okay, so moving along, now we're going to do 3 exercises. Pause the video, see if you can do these on your own. It says to rewrite the expression by completing the square. Okay, so here we go. So the first thing we're going to do is take that 3 out. And we're going to leave the x terms in, and then put the minus 8 out here. But if I factor out a 3, then that 12 divided by 3 is 4. So half of 4 is 2. And I'm going to put that here in red, 2 squared. And since I added 3 times 2 squared, I'm going to subtract 3 times 2 squared. Do you see that with the color coding? Okay, so now that I've done that, hopefully you can see what's going to happen here. It's going to be 3, and then my parentheses, x plus 2, quantity squared, and this portion will give me this here. And 2 squared is 4, times 3 is 12. So it's negative 8 minus 12, or negative 20. Okay, number 2. First thing I'm going to do is, didn't I change that to green? Everybody see that? Did y'all see that? I changed that to green, and it stayed. Anyway, 4 parentheses p squared minus, what's 12 divided by 4? 3p, and then half of the 3. So I'll move this over here. So I have a negative 3 as my b divided by 2, and then I'm going to square that, and I'm going to get 9 quarters. Anyway, if I take half of that, then that's going to be, let me close this parentheses and put plus 13 here first. So I've just factored out a 4. Now I'm taking half of b and squaring it. So that's going to end up being, I'm going to represent it as this, minus 3 halves squared. So I'm going to add 4 times 3 halves squared. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to have this 4 parentheses p minus 3 halves quantity squared. There's our perfect square. But we have plus 13 minus 4 times 3 squared over, or 3 halves squared. Well, 3 halves squared is 9 quarters. So let me just show this. Plus 13 plus 4 over 1, if you will, times 9 over 4. And those cancel. So what we're really doing is taking 13 plus 9. So my final answer is going to be 4 parentheses p minus 3 halves squared plus 13 plus 9, or 22. Or 13 minus 9. Okay, made a mistake here. This is always going to be positive because when you square a negative, you get positive. It's positive. So if that's plus, we have to subtract 4 times that. So 4 times a positive 3 halves squared minus 4 times 3 halves squared will cancel. All right. So anywho, this is minus. So when I take 13 minus 9, I get 4. So my final answer is 4 times p minus 3 halves squared plus 4. Okay, last one, number 3. Okay, this time a is a half. It's a fraction. Same thing. We take a half. I wanted to color code that. We take a half. Let's use red again. And then take parentheses and put our y's inside. Y squared plus, and if I factor out a half, divided it by a half, then I'm going to get, remember dividing by a half is the same as multiplying by 2. So if I have 3 here, this would be, what is 3 half of? Think of it that way. So this would be 6y, right? 1/2 times y squared is 1/2 y squared. 1/2 times 6 is 3. Leave space, -4. So I'm going to take this 6 off to the side and divide it by 2, and that equals 3. And I'm going to square that, and that equals 9. But I'm going to leave it as 3 squared here. So it's going to be plus 3 squared. But over here it's going to be minus 1/2 times that 3/2 squared. Okay, I don't know why I have a fraction here. Let me erase this. Okay, so let's recap. We have this 6, that's our b. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Squared is 9. But I'm going to just write 3 squared here instead of the 9. So it's 1/2 times 3 squared, so it's minus 1/2 times 3 squared. And now that I've got this, I can finish it. So I have 1/2, perfect square now, y, and our b is going to be, it's going to be plus 3, the square root of 3 squared, minus 4, minus 1/2 times 9, or minus 9/2. And simplify. 1/2 y plus 3 quantity squared minus 8/2. See what I did here? 4 is 8/2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Okay, so that's minus 9/2. This will become 1/2 y plus 3 quantity squared minus 8 minus another 9 is minus 17 over 2. And there is our completing the square of this expression. Okay, page 4, exercise 4. First thing we're going to do is take the a term out, parentheses, n squared minus. So what we have to do here is figure out what we're going to get when we take 3 divided by 1.2. Okay, so if I take 3 divided by 1.2, 3 divided by 1.2 is 2.5. So that is going to go here. It's going to be 2.5 n. Leave space. Put plus 6.5 at the end. Okay. I take my 2.5, which is my b, and I divide it by 2. And that equals 1.25. And then I'm going to square that. So that's going to go here. Plus 1.25 squared minus 1.2 times 1.25 squared, right? 1.2 times 1.25 squared, and that's positive, and then a negative one of the same thing. Okay, so then I'm going to finish this. 1.2 parentheses n minus my b, which is 1.25, or my 2.5 divided by 2, which is 1.25. So that's going to be 1.25 quantity squared. So that's this piece here. And then we're going to do plus 6.5 minus this. So I'll just do that for now. Plus 6.5. And then negative 1.2 times 1.25 squared. Okay, so let's use a calculator for this. Let's do the 1.25 squared first. That's in the parentheses. 1.25 squared is 1.5625. And I'm going to multiply that by 1.2 times 1.2. And I get 1.875. So it's minus 1.875. Okay, that's this value here. Finishing it up, I get 1.2 times n minus 1.25 quantity squared, and then 6.5 minus 1.875. 6.5 minus 1.875 equals 4.625. So that's plus 4.625. So this is completing the square of this. Okay, that was a little bit more challenging with the decimal places. Okay, number 5. First thing I do is take my a out and then put v squared minus 4v inside, leave a space, put my constant outside. Bring over here, half of 4 is 2, that equals 2 squared. So I'm going to write that as plus 2 squared here, minus 1/3 times 2 squared. Okay, now we need to simplify this, so this is going to be 1/3 v, and it's going to be minus our b, which was b divided by 2, I should say, which is v minus 2. Oh, I made a mistake. Time out. Let's do this one over. I apologize for that. I forgot to change my b value. So again, we start off by taking a out. And then I put parentheses, v squared minus, all right, 1/3 times v squared is v squared. 1/3 of what is 4? Well, that's supposed to be a 12v. I forgot to do that. I forgot to multiply 4 times 3 to get what we would have there, and then put the plus 10 out here. So now my b is 12. 12 divided by 2 is 6. Quantity squared, which would be 36, but we're going to use this format here. So it's going to be plus 6 squared minus 1/3 of 6 squared. Okay, I apologize for that mistake, but this one is now easier. So now I have 1/3 v minus 6 squared plus 10, and 6 squared is 36. 36 times 1/3 is the same as 36 divided by 3, which is 12. So it's 10 minus 12, and that will finish us by having v 1/3 times v minus 6 quantity squared minus 2. So this is the completing the square of that. Okay, number 6 says a fast food restaurant has determined that its price function is 3 minus x over 20,000, where x represents the number of hamburgers sold. A, the cost of producing x hamburgers is determined by the expression 5,000 plus 0.56x. Write an expression representing the profit for selling x hamburgers. Okay, so I brought this equation in from our notes from the first page. And it says so the equation is profit equals total revenue minus total production costs, which equals quantity times price minus cost. So quantity, x represents the number of hamburgers. So our quantity is x. So our profit is going to equal quantity, x, times our price, and the price is this right here. So it's going to be 3 minus x over 20,000. So that's quantity times price minus the cost. And it says the cost of producing the hamburgers is this expression right here. So the cost is going to be 5,000 plus 0.56x. x. So there's our equation. Now we just need to simplify this by distributing. And x times 3 is 3x. X times x over 20,000 is going to be x squared over 20,000 minus 5,000 plus 0.56x. And now I'm going to combine like terms. And I don't need this parentheses here. Okay, so I have 3x here, I have plus 0.56x there, or minus, it's not plus, it's minus, because it was in parentheses. I should have had this in parentheses here, and when I distribute, this would be minus. Okay, just have to be careful with our distribution, all right? Okay, so we're subtracting the cost equation. That's got to be put in parentheses and distributed. All right, so we have 3x. So I'm going to put my negative x squared over 20,000 first, and then my linear term. 3 minus 0.56 is plus 2.44x minus our constant 5,000. Okay, so it said, write an expression representing the profit for selling X hamburgers. So here it is, negative x squared over 20,000 plus 2.44x minus 5,000. Whew. Part B says to complete the square for your expression in Part A, to determine the number of hamburgers that need to be sold to maximize the profit given the price function. So if you look at this right here, negative x squared over 20,000 is equal to a negative 1/20,000ths times x squared. I can pull that fraction out, if you will. So that's going to be what I have to factor out, so I get an x squared. So I want a parentheses with an x squared here. So I'm going to factor out a negative 1/20,000. That's what I'm factoring out of this. I'm going to get x squared here, but then I have to ask myself, how do I get 2.44x if I factor out 1/20,000th? So what I'm going to do is multiply 20,000 by 2.44. So it's 2.44 times 20,000. Enter. And that's 48,800. So that's going to be minus 48,800. Now let me explain that again. X. So it's this term right here we're getting. I factored out a negative 1/20,000. Negative 1/20,000 times negative 48,800 is 2.44. Negative times a negative is positive, and 48,800 divided by 20,000 is 2.44. Okay? Leave our space and put our minus 5,000 outside. So this may seem really difficult, but with a calculator it's actually not that bad. So then I take that 48,800, divide it by 2, and get 24,200. And I'm going to square that. So I'm just going to write that as plus 24,200 squared. And I'm going to, that's being subtracted, that's a negative over here. So I'm going to add 24,200 squared over 20,000, which is 1/20,000 times this. I can just write it as this. Okay, so this times this is negative, and this is this times this positive, so they would cancel out, and we get back to what we started with. Okay, so now that I've done that, we just need to simplify. So now that's going to equal, we leave the 1 over 20,000, parentheses, x minus, because that's a minus sign, and our b was 24,200. Quantity squared, and then I just have to calculate 5,000 minus this, so I'll use my calculator for that. So it's 5,000 minus 24,200 squared divided by 20,000. And I get negative 24,282. Is that right? Oh, I made a mistake here. 48,800, half of that is not 2. I'm off. Half of 4 is 2, half of 8 is 4, half of 8 is 4. This should be 24,400. So this is 24,400. Let me do it in red. And this is 24,400 squared. And this is 24,400 squared minus, and now I just need to go back in my calculator and do second enter, and then go back to that 24,000. What just happened? 24,200, and change this to a 4 and hit enter. And it's negative 24,768. Okay, so there is completing the square of this equation. Okay, page 5 brings us to the end of the lesson. Review the lesson summary and go to your problem set.